I think it's a lack of education a lot of times. And I don't mean a formal education. It's not that they need to go to school to figure these things out, and it's not that they need to make it a point to research every possible article or research study and get into the details about it, but to have a general understanding of what it is that they are doing to themselves in order to better themselves, I think is really important. I think that athletes should take time every single week. It should be just part of their programming. They should anticipate having 30 to 60 minutes a week where they go and they research or talk to a professional about a new concept of recovery. It doesn't mean a breakthrough concept on recovery, but just some of the fundamentals, some of the general topics about it, and figure out how can I look to implement this, or how can I take this and go talk to a recovery specialist to see if this is what I need to do, and how do I need to do it, and how can I slowly start to incorporate this into what I'm already doing. But instead of doing that, often what happens is that they fall prey to what is popular on social media. And in some ways, athletes are doing a lot more now than ever before for their recovery. And speaking as someone who has been working with athletes for the past 8 or 9 years in some capacity, whether it was when I was a strength and conditioning coach for gymnasts, or working with speed and agility training, but also in the recovery aspect, where I worked at a chiropractic facility for a number of years as an assistant, and realizing that when I first started off, the things that were being promoted, like the big thing at the time when I first was starting off, was foam rolling. Like, this was amazing for coaches to be able to take these foam rollers and just ta-da, go roll on this, and it's going to help out your muscles, and we touted it as poor man's massage, and it's going to make all the difference in the world as far as blood flow and recovery and mobility and helping out with soreness after working out. But when you're working with athletes long enough, you realize that you're very limited on what you can do, but you're also really limited on what that athlete is going to be able to actually implement. Because for the most part, I was working with middle school, high school kids. They could only understand a certain amount of information because I don't have the background. So you can't throw a ton of science at them. We talked about different variations in stretching, or we talked about use of the foam roller or other soft tissue devices before and after working out, or even between sets and working out. And we would talk a little bit about nutrition, we would talk about sleep, just touching on these aspects, because not only would they only be able to understand a portion of it, they'd only be able to understand a portion of what, or they'd only be able to use a portion of what they understood, and assuming that they have the parents' help. And there's all these other factors that go into it, where you tell a student you should be getting a certain amount of sleep, and you should be doing these things at night in order to help have the best sleep quality, and you should make sure you get to bed at a certain time. And then they come and talk to you later on, they're like, well, I have 5 hours of homework that I have to do, and I have to do it on the computer because that's how it's set up. And you sat there and had a conversation with them about how you shouldn't be looking at a screen past a certain time because it's going to be messing up your sleep quality. It's like, well, what do you expect them to do? So you're constantly fighting this tug of war with what would be technically the best for them, and what are the situations or circumstances they're in that they are forced to do certain things, and you're just trying to get around that. Most of it comes down to the lowest hanging fruit. It's like, if you can, you're getting 7-8 hours of sleep, and that's a ballpark for a lot of people, because with athletes often that's more than 7-8 hours, especially at certain times. And if you actually get into the amount of recovery that the nervous system requires at certain points within the season or within a program for strength training, when you have an athlete who's peaking in order to go into competition, or if you look at athletes that are doing 2-a-days, the amount of necessary sleep, so you can have a certain number of sleep cycles, varies quite a bit from the beginning of season to the end of season to when they're in their off season. But you don't really get to have that conversation in depth that way with most athletes who are at that age. You just have to say, like, hey, try to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and you're just ballparking this general recovery concept. So that's one of the things that's keeping a lot of it back, is that I wish that athletes would take that and just run with it. It was like, well, he said this, maybe I can go and look online and find some more information, which, you know, there's all kinds of information that they could find, and then they're coming back with you asking about whether they should do crazy things in order to help out the recovery. It's like, just stop, don't do those things. But one of the other obstacles that comes along with it is, like, recovery isn't fun. It's not the sexy concept. You know, athletes want to show up and they want to train. They want to feel like they accomplished something. They want to set a PR on a lift, or they want to run a new best time. They want to accomplish a goal, and recovery is very rarely ever a goal. You know, for me, I'm biased because it's my job and I really enjoy the profession and I'm a nerd about it. But it's not a conversation that most people get excited to have, let alone make the time to have if they know that it's necessary. So getting them to realize how important it is, that it is the opposite side of the same coin when it comes to training. I mean, it's difficult. You'll see athletes now where they will do a better job of, you know, doing a little bit of mobility beforehand and warming up a little bit better, and, you know, they'll do some cool down stretching or some cool down work. You know, I see that more now in this facility because it is a more serious training environment than in any other facility I've ever been in or have trained in myself. But if I were to have a 5 to 10 minute conversation with any one of them and I said, hey, you know what would work even better than what you're doing is just A, B, C, and D, it would be the same amount of time that they're spending on what they're doing to be an even greater benefit. And what I have come to realize is that I can have that conversation with them. It won't change things until they want to have that conversation with me. And, you know, that's true with a lot of things, but in particular with the recovery aspect, until they realize the benefit that it's going to have, and then realizing that they're going to get an even greater benefit if they do it the right way at the right time for them as an individual, then that conversation doesn't mean anything. Because again, recovery isn't entertaining. It's not fun. It's not sexy. I think there's a lot of, you know, misconstrued information out there too, where they probably get really fed up with the idea of hearing about recovery. You know, it's the same thing going back to talking about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Like, everybody talks about sleep being this super important thing to the point that it's become super saturated, and it doesn't mean anything anymore, regardless of how true it is and how important it is. Because you hear it so often, it doesn't mean anything. No one cares. It's just, oh yeah, he's talking about sleep again. And he gets ignored. So if I go out there and I start talking about doing self-care over and over and over and over again, it almost has the opposite effect because it gets talked about too much. But if an athlete comes in and they train for, say, 1 or 2 hours a day, and I work with gymnasts who train for 4 to 5 hours a day. All right, so 1 to 2 hours isn't unrealistic in any way. And their whole focus are those 1 to 2 hours. Well, what about the other 22 hours in the day? What are you doing with those in order to get the maximum benefit of the workout that you just did, but also set yourself up so that you're ready for the next day? And then think about the compounding effect, where if you look at a traditional strength training program that runs a macro cycle of, say, 4 to 6 weeks, and you're doing that for 4 to 6 weeks, that means that you haven't maximized the benefits during that entire time. That's a huge waste of athletic potential if you're not doing little things to get the most out of every single day. And they don't have to be ginormous things. Like, we have all of these things that have become really popular now with, like, cryotherapy and like PRP and stem cell injections and doing body tempering, where these are aggressive versions of therapy. Like, they are above and beyond the norm. And there's a place for every single one of them. Every single one of those things is beneficial and useful for the right person at the right time for the right thing. But before you ever get to a stage where those things are beneficial, there's always these little things that you could be doing too. And it's just getting the athlete to understand that those other 22 hours a day are as important, if not more important, than the 1 to 2 hours when you come in. And they get focused on the accomplishment of those 1 or 2 hours. And to have a conversation where afterward you say, hey, you did a really good job on your clean and jerk or on your deadlift, and you put more weight on the bar, or you hit a new best time on your 5K. But by the way, you're not doing a couple things that would have made it even better or help you out even more in the long term. It's almost like they feel, and I can watch it when I have these conversations, that's why I say this, like, you can watch it on their face that they feel like you just took that accomplishment away from them. Like, you're not acknowledging the amount of hard work that they did because you're giving them a critique. But instead, from my perspective, as a professional who's trying to help them, I'm saying that because I recognize how much hard work they're putting into that. And I'm trying to help them get as much out of that hard work as they can. I'm not negating the hard work. I'm not saying that because they're not getting enough sleep or the proper nutrition, or they're not looking at the timing of their nutrition, or they're not cutting out the amount of light that they're looking at a certain point in night so they hit the proper number of sleep cycles, or the state of the nervous system and tracking those things. I'm not saying that they didn't just work their ass off for 1 to 2 hours because they didn't do those other things. I'm trying to let them know that as hard as they worked, they're going to get so much more out of that effort if they do a couple of these other little things along the way.